Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization Show, the home of Googlization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on all around us and explore the disruptive convergence of technology, business, and people. Here are your hosts, Ira Wolfe and Jason Cochran.
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization, winner of the Most Forward-Thinking Impact Award from the People Forward Network. I'm Ira Wolfe, and thank you for being part of Googlization Nation.
And I'm Jason Cochran. If you think this is just another podcast, think again. We're the voice of the most important, crucial conversations that are confronting business leaders and people today. Our goal is to bring you ways to reimagine tomorrow and explore the convergence and impact of business, technology, and people.
This episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googlization is sponsored by our partner, Y Institute, your personal and professional GPS for a meaningful life and purpose-filled career. You'll hear more about the Y Institute and the Y operating system a little later in the show. So we are only on day 1 of 2020, or day 11, not New Year's Day, but day 11 of 2023. And already the only thing that seems predictable is that 2023 will be more never normal than ever. That's why we're so excited that today is the first of 2 back-to-back events that we'll be hosting to help you navigate the future of work, its labor markets, the job markets, and even the money markets. So joining us in just a few minutes will be Gad Levanon, Chief Economist at the Burning Glass Institute. You're going to want to grab a pen and pencil and turn off all the distractions because you are going to want to listen to what Gad has to say about the labor markets and hiring for 2023. Then tomorrow, January 12th, our friends from Odeon Capital Conversations, Dick Beauvais, Matt Van Alstyne, and our co-host moderator, John Aidan Byrne, join us once again to talk about the economy, jobs, and money markets. The last time they visited us in November of 2022, just a few weeks ago, we had a record-breaking 25,000 downloads in 24 hours. So you're not going to want to miss this one. And to register, you can easily go to our website, geeksgeezers.googlization.com. Click on special events, and you'll get all the information there, how to join us tomorrow. But that's only the beginning. Next week, on January 18th, we have Chip Conley, who joins us to tell us about how to turn your midlife crisis, and there's a lot of people in there, into a calling. So Chip's the founder of Modern Elder Academy, and it should be quite a follow-up to our spectacular conversation with Stephen Kotler right at the end of the new year over the holiday. And hopefully if you had a chance to listen, if not, it is available on our podcast. And we're still not done yet because the Talent Board just released their annual Candy Research study. And they are the foremost authority on candidate experience. So Kevin Grossman, president of the Talent Board, is going to join us to reveal their most recent findings about the candidate experience and its impact on every company's ability to attract and hire the best talent. So that's on January 26th. So we got a pack, what we're calling a GGG Palooza of a month. But before we bring on our favorite chief economist, Gad Levanon, it's time for our Perfect Labor Storm segment. So this is where on each week, we focus on just one disruptive, surprising, or worrisome trend that we believe you should know. So here is today's Perfect Labor Storm segment. And I pulled these stats from a report, what we'll be talking about shortly with Gad, How Skills Are Disrupting Work. It's an excellent read. I highly recommend everybody go up to burningglassinstitute.org and download it under the research tab. It was a collaborative effort from Burning Glass Institute, Business Higher Education Forum, and Wiley. So here's some of the findings that they had. On average, 37% of the top 20 skills requested for U.S. jobs have changed since 2016. 37% of the top 20 skills have changed. So let me say it another way. The average U.S. worker has had to replace or upgrade over 1/3 of their skills simply to keep up with the demands of their occupation. Here's one example. In 2011, just 11 years ago, 12 years ago, there were just under 300,000 job posts seeking people with data analysis skills in only 17 occupations. So 300 jobs looking for people with data analysis skills. And that was in a limited number of jobs, 17 different occupations. Just 10 years later, 2021, 1.2 million job posts, that's 4 times, were posted in 81 occupations. So not only were employees required to acquire new skills, but it was also happening across a much wider range of industries as well. 1 out of 8 job postings all require one of these 4 emerging skills, and we'll be talking about this with Gad: product management, social media, cloud computing, AI, and machine learning. These extend across a lot of sectors as diverse as manufacturing and public administration. And in 2021, there were over 5 million job postings that mentioned one of these skills. In some industries, over 1/3 of all the job postings included one or more of those skills.
Holy cow, Ira. I mean, all of this makes me wonder, does the economy even recognize itself anymore when it looks in the mirror? I mean, so much is changing and has changed in just a short amount of time. And while, today, for the most part, we're going to focus with Gad on the here and now of what we need to expect this year with the economy and the labor market, I'm also wondering about the future. For example, the Institute for the Future has shared that around 85% of the jobs that we think are going to exist by 2030, they haven't even been invented yet. And it's makes me also ponder that there's no wonder that Richard Foster from Yale University said 40% of the current Fortune 500 companies, they're not even going to be around by 2028. So just as the economy is evolving and changing before our very eyes, so too are our ways of measuring and understanding it, which is why we're so lucky to have Gad on the show today, so he can help us make sense of all of this upside down, topsy-turvy stuff that's going on and make sure that we enter into this year understanding what's going on around us and prepare and take action and prepare for the future as well.
And just a reminder, if you are a SHRM member and you're looking for credits, you can earn SHRM credits just merely by listening and watching to the show. You can get anywhere between a half and a full credit. To earn that credit, simply go, well, not to earn it, but to activate that credit, simply go to geeksgeezersandgoogleization.com. That's our new website, geeksgeezersgoogleization.com. On the upper right corner, click on podcast, and then underneath that, there's a short form you need to fill out just to verify you listened, and we will send you an activity code. While you're there, if you're not a member of GoogleizationNation.com, please follow us and join us. We will send you updates each week of upcoming events and highlights of the previous week. And then finally, if you're listening on a podcast, whatever your favorite podcast platform is, please leave a review and rate us. We really appreciate that.
And with that, it's perfect time to bring our guest on today, Gad Levanon, Chief Economist with the Burning Glass Institute. Let's give a warm Googleization Nation welcome to Gad.
Thank you very much. It was I felt like a football star for a few seconds there.
Yeah, it's a lot safer in this environment, though, right?
Right.
Yeah, for sure. So, Gad, I think you and I met. I heard you speak about somewhere in the last 3 years, probably about somewhere between the second and third year of the first year of the pandemic. You were quite popular. Everybody was wondering what's happening, where are we going, what's it going to look like, when we're going to come out of this pandemic. So conveniently, we're about 3 years out. So we're almost at the beginning, and yet we're still living in this never normal, as we call it, getting a lot of mixed signals. So what we'd like to do is get your take on where we are right now with the labor markets, because there's a lot of confusion out there, but also have you reflect a little bit on the last 3 years. Where have we been? What surprised you the most? Because you had a lot of experience. This is what you study day in and day out. What surprised you the most about February 2023 from what you thought might happen in February of 2020?
Yeah, no, there is a lot to reflect about. I guess the way I would kind of frame the current situation in the labor market. I don't know if you've watched the movie Batman, but there is some point there where the Joker says that's what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. So that's what I would think about now. The unstoppable force is the American jobs generation machine, which seems unstoppable despite all the chatter about a recession and the Fed raising interest rates. The number of jobs in the U.S. is continuing to grow rapidly. The immovable object is the labor supply in the U.S., the number of available workers. So that also doesn't seem to be moving, despite being in the most severe labor shortage in memory. The labor force participation rate is not moving up. For the first time in U.S. history, the number of people in the working age population is declining. So we kind of need more and more people to work, but there is no increase in their availability. So that's kind of leading to a super tight labor market still through the end of 2022 or the beginning of 2023. And you know what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object is what the Fed decides would happen. And they are afraid of inflation, rightly so. So they can't do anything about the immovable object. So what they will try to do is stop the unstoppable force. And I think, unfortunately, is that in 2023 that means that we will enter a recession. So that's kind of in a few sentences the 30,000 feet view.
Gad, Ira, you're on mute.
Sure. There is a lot to unpack there, Gad. And it's interesting because just last night I heard, and again, another economist, lots of different opinions, and he was pretty much saying that there are no signs of a recession, that it's almost the media and it's the hype and almost the belief that we should be entering a recession based on all the signs that are available and everything that we know about what happened in the past. But again, living in this never normal and unpredictable times, and as you gave a great example about, when an unstoppable object hits an immovable force, it seems almost that they're changing the definition of a recession, what that might be. But beyond the recession, I mean, and obviously that's going to impact that, and we'll come back to some of your forecasts down the road. We talk about, I've been talking about this perfect labor storm for 20 plus years. And so a lot of these trends weren't surprising. It just seems that we hit this brick wall with the pandemic, and it just showed all our vulnerabilities and different things that were going on. The labor participation rate is a key. No doubt about that. But there's still a lot of deniers. I mean, even though the writing seems to be on the wall, and it seems to be, at least for the three of us and many other people, that it's a given that there is a labor shortage. We had a really interesting, I would say, provocative conversation with another consultant the other day. And it was like, she said, basically, I'm going to stop you there. That's BS. There is no labor shortage. because we're going to need fewer and fewer jobs going forward.
Well, I've been hearing this claim since the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, and that robots will replace jobs, and not everyone who wants to work will be able to find work. And you know, I think in 2010 that was a serious discussion, but now in 2023, after a decade, or I would say 5-6 years of very low unemployment rate and very low labor productivity growth. If there was a significant amount of automation, we would see output per hour of work, which is the definition of productivity. We would see this increase a lot. But in fact, the decade before the pandemic, we had the weakest labor productivity growth. So I know there is a lot of chatter about a lot of jobs being eliminated, but at least since 2010, it's not really happening.
Which brings up an interesting point, and I referenced this earlier. Burning Glass Institute, in collaboration with Business Hire Forum, Education Forum, and Wiley, produced a really excellent report, Skills That Are Disrupting Work. And again, I encourage everybody to go there. I'll put up the banner in just a second of where you can download it. But I guess we're creating jobs. The jobs that are creating it certainly require new skills. Just as your report showed, 37% of all, the average was 30%, almost 1/3 of all jobs required individuals to learn new skills, and that's only in the last 5 years. So give us a little bit of insight on that. I mean, where are we going? Because we're creating the jobs. There's not enough people. There's just not enough bodies to fill those jobs. A lot of the bodies that can fill those jobs don't have a lot of the skills that we need. Again, just a lot of this never normal.
Yeah. So there is, you know, there are a lot of new technologies and skills that are being added to the economy. In many cases, it's not to replace workers, but to kind of augment what workers are doing and make them better at what they're doing. But it's true, we have like a kind of both a labor shortage and somewhat of a skill shortage because of the rapid churn in skills at the same time. By the way, a lot of the labor shortage that we do have are in jobs that actually are relatively low skill jobs, jobs that typically do not require a BA, a lot in in-person services, manual services, some blue collar. So that is actually, as opposed to most decades, I would say in the last 5-6 years, the shortage is much more severe in those blue collar and manual services jobs.
And with that, Gad, so if that's the immovable object that a lot of organizations are up against, knowing that a lot of our listeners today are business leaders, many of whom probably are in charge of talent acquisition, what are their options to try and get around this immovable object? Because they can't go through it. What are their options to try and get around it and continue to increase productivity and drive value in the market in 2023?
Yeah. So at the macro level, there isn't that much that businesses can do. It's more of a question of getting more immigrants into the US, high-skilled immigrants especially. It's more about changing perhaps some laws and regulations to encourage more people to start working again. I think at the company level, there is no one solution. I think it's a kind of range of strategies, starting in the recruitment process, like in a period of high turnover and a lot of options for workers to make quick hiring decisions, fewer interviews, starting a referral program, using staffing companies, changing the credentials or the requirements for a job, both in terms of education and in terms of experience. So there are a lot of, when I actually was in my previous job, we wrote a report and we kind of offered 58 types of strategies, and in that report that maybe you can share later, you could see what companies are using more or less. I can tell you one of the surprising things, one of the things that we suggested there is retaining older workers, and that was the strategy least used by employers. That's not something they strongly believe in, apparently.
And Gad, as a millennial, I can tell you my experience being in school was there was such a push for literally everyone to go to college. Like, oh, you don't know what you want to do? Go to college and you'll figure it out. And you come out with $100,000 in debt many times and still not knowing what you want to do in terms of work. Do you think potentially part of this is more organizations, companies partnering with schools, developing trade programs, apprenticeship programs, and things like that? Again, and trying to revitalize that aspect of education and the more youthful end of the labor spectrum.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that is needed. I would say in our education system, the vocational education is not the strongest part, and it was one of the hardest hit parts of during the pandemic. So I think in that segment of the labor market, the more companies can do, the better.
And you mentioned also on the other end of the spectrum with older workers, we should probably be doing a better job of recruiting and retaining them as well. And it's fascinating you shared that because we mentioned at the outset, Stephen Kotler, who's the executive director of the Flow Research Academy, was sharing with us a lot of research on a lot of the skills that are needed, soft skills in particular, in organizations to be successful. He gave 3 examples: empathy, wisdom, and creativity. Those don't peak from a neurological perspective until folks are in their 50s and 60s. So what should we be doing to try and make sure that we're trying to create work environments that are conducive to being able to keep some of those workers around where they're seeing it beneficial instead of just seeing the early door to retirement?
I think it's a big obstacle. I think in many people's minds, kind of their prior is that they should not hire older workers. In most cases, it's not justifiable. So I think it's a lot of it is a mind shift to make it people believe that it is a viable option. So there's a lot of convincing to do there.
One of the examples that was given in the report, in the recent report that you had about skills, there was really an excellent example, because I think when people talk about web development or about technical skills, I still hear this. They talk about developing websites, web developers, and yet that pretty much has been automated. You can easily do that. You don't really need any technical skills. You don't need any coding. Very easy to put up a website. But the skill sets that web developers have also are the basic skills that a data analyst requires.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we, other than telling people that, and getting that message out and looking at the graphs and seeing that there's a direct line, that here's a pool of people. And then the other thing is, just as an aside, what that also solves is another issue that we're dealing with, which is DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're saying, how can we take a lot of these jobs that are lower wage, they were high demand, lower wage, lower skill, that also were oftentimes filled by people, minorities, and be able to upskill them where they can be not just giving them more dollars, not giving them $15 instead of 8 for the same job, but they have the potential to earn more. They have the potential to go in a high demand job, not a lower demand job, and improve their lot, and also basically help create a more diverse, inclusive, equitable environment. So there's a lot there to unpack, but it seems like there's an easy solution to be able to do it, but nothing seems to happen.
Well, I think more is beginning to happen, both from the perspective of companies and also education and course providers, because there is, like the example that you gave, web developers. With some training, they could become software developers, which is a very much in-demand job. So how do you get a web developer to become a software developer? What are the courses or skills that they need to acquire? So I think there's definitely, in the Burning Glass Institute, we are talking both with companies and with education providers about this gap analysis. Which occupations are similar enough to in-demand occupations that with some training and learning they could fill this gap and move to higher positions. So I'm more optimistic on that front.
It seems like one of the solutions, and you briefly mentioned this earlier, and I wrote about it in my book 6 years ago, which was about credentialing. That credentialing needs changes, because to move from a web developer into software, or even having a high school student or a recent grad who happens to know coding, to be able to have that skill. But if they don't have that degree, if they have certificates of completion from Coursera or Udemy or some online service, they may be as skilled or more skilled than people that have a degree. So how I guess the question is what changes, or are you seeing changes in how companies credential?
Well, so that's interesting and interesting story, because on the one hand, a lot of companies are saying, yeah, we don't require, or we're no longer requiring a BA. It's not necessary. They drop the BA requirement from job ads. But then when you look at the composition of education in different jobs over time in the US, in almost every occupation, you see the opposite trend of a higher share of people with a BA in those jobs. So it's not clear if they say one thing and do the other thing, or there is a kind of, or their intentions are good, but there are other trends in the macroeconomy at the same time. Because what we also know is there's been in recent decades a big increase in the share of people who get a BA. So in some way there is a relatively abundance over the last decade of people with BA, or I would say it another way, the shortage in jobs that don't require BA is much larger than the shortage in jobs that do require a BA. So, if companies have enough people with a BA, then they are not as desperate to recruit people without a BA. I think that's also what's going on.
Yeah, and I think when you say that, I think in the past, and I've probably been around longer than either of you, and many of the listeners. In the past, when you would say that there are many jobs, or there may be more jobs that don't require a degree than do, that also meant that was going to be a lower wage.
Mm-hmm.
That sure, you don't need a degree, and we need a lot of people in those jobs, but you're sort of stuck. That's your career. Where are you going to go? What's your growth? But the evidence seems to be out there now that that's not the case. There's a lot of roles, a lot of jobs, a lot of occupations that you can earn 6 figures, but not require even a 2-year degree
Right.
to be able to do that.
Yeah, in recent years, the wage growth in kind of blue collar and manual service jobs was much, much higher than for professionals with a BA. It's been quite a remarkable trend. So, on the margins, like for people who kind of, there are a lot of people who know that they go to college, and there are a lot of people who know that they are not going to college. But there is few millions in the middle who really kind of are on the fence. And when you see faster wage growth for jobs that don't require a BA, more people will choose not to do that.
Yeah, I think this is an important message, and I don't want it to get lost. And then we're going to take a quick break. And I just want to let everyone know, if you have any questions, if you are listening and have a question for Gad, please put it into the chat on whatever platform you're listening, and we'll try to get to that. But we're going to be taking a real quick break. But what I wanted to say before we leave is important to realize that when we're talking about that you may not need formal education, that doesn't mean that you don't need to keep learning. So, part of this is that it in the past, it used to be that if you had a 4-year degree or you had a master's degree or a professional degree, that was it. And you can live for 30 or 40 years in that same role with just taking a few CEUs every now and then. As we've talked about before with even the last 5 years, with 1/3 of jobs requiring new skills, or 1/3 of individuals having new skills, continuous learning is going to be really important, so that it might not be that we don't need 4-year degree, whatever that 4-year degree, we might not need a college education, but we're going to have to change the role of education and the placement of education in all our lives. So we're going to take a real quick break. We've been listening to Gad Levanon, from a chief economist at Burning Glass Institute. We will be right back. Stay tuned.
For most of us, change is freaking terrifying, and unfortunately, there's no app to adapt. That might change in the not-so-distant future, but for now, we're on our own. That means we can either accept our default future or reimagine our tomorrow. For those of you who choose default, good luck. Just remember, there's no pause button for change. You can't turn back the clock, and there's no get-out-of-jail-free card in this age of perpetual uncertainty. Like it or not, change will happen all around us. And that change is not becoming just more disruptive and frequent, but volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, or VUCA. Fortunately, you can make change work for you and turn it into your personal and competitive advantage. Reimagine your future to one in which you're living with purpose, you're happy, and you're growing, thriving, and flourishing. If you're ready to rewrite your next life chapter and regain control of your destiny in this never normal world, your journey starts here. Contact the leader in adaptability and making change work for you, your team, and your organization. Ira S. Wolfe, adaptability.expert.
There's a certain kind of coach who believes what we believe, who leads people to greatness, who gets people unstuck, who unlocks all of your passion. A coach who helps people discover what drives them, to tap into their superpowers. That knowing your why is the first step to untap potential, to focus, to breakthroughs. A coach who's looking for a better way. Are you that coach?
Hey, welcome back, everyone, to Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization. Thank you for being part of Googleization Nation. We've got Gad Levanon, chief economist at the Burning Glass Institute, as our guest today. And we're talking about the labor markets, job markets, the economy, hiring, skill shortages, whole sort of things. So there's so much we can talk about, Gad, but there's one, I guess, another elephant in the room that's been out there about wages. So we've had, over the pandemic, in a response maybe to the labor shortages and maybe just continuous pressure, the the argument about minimum wage seems to have almost gone away, because most companies, just to compete, have now gone to increasing their wages, which then fed into the argument that it was the cause of runaway inflation, which is why the Fed was responding. But with the labor shortage as it is, or at least in the near future, what's going on with wage growth? I mean, it's slowed a bit in the most recent numbers that we had. Do you see it slowing down? Do you see it continuing to drive? What role will wage growth play in hiring, labor markets, and the economy?
Yeah. Well, there may have been some moderation, but wage growth is still well above normal. And with the labor market tightness remaining, the labor market remaining very tight, I don't see wage growth moderating much more. I think they'll stay well above normal until the economy weakens significantly. And it is, a lot of the initial wage growth was in new hires. But what we are seeing in the last year is that also companies are giving much bigger raises than they used to before the pandemic. Now, the raises are not enough to compensate for inflation, but they are much higher than they used to be. So I see still above normal wage growth in 2023. Now, the thing is, in terms of the impact on the economy, the Federal Reserve, I think, correctly identifies the labor market as the key to their decisions. They can't imagine that they can control inflation when wages are growing so fast. So as long as the labor market is tight and wage growth is strong, they will continue to raise interest rates. And unfortunately, as I said earlier, I think they will raise it so much that in 2023 we will enter a recession.
I had a question, and I wanted to ask this in the beginning, and then got distracted, and we went off a couple of other things. For years, because we talk about labor market and job markets, and those were almost used synonymously because they were in parallel. The economy went up, the demand for labor went up, and we had more jobs, and the reverse. They seem to be out of sync now. Are the labor when should we stop using labor market and job market synonymously?
Well, it's a matter of definition. I guess, maybe labor talks more about the side of the workers, maybe the supply of labor, whereas job is from the perspective of employers, so the demand for labor. I think it's clearer when you use supply and demand than maybe labor market and job market. So maybe that's the way to look at it. Yeah,
and that's maybe what I was going to. And I've had other people say, no, they're the same thing, and don't confuse people. But to me, they're really branching out. They're really diverging.
Yeah, that's the immovable object and the unstoppable force. Yeah,
love that.
And on the supply side, Gad. I'm still hearing some things, and I want your opinion on this and what the data is telling us. I still hear from some leaders that on the supply side, they think the reason that we're in a tight labor market is because a lot of people don't want to work. That's their primary reason. It's more complicated than that, isn't it? I mean, you have some research on long COVID is playing an impact on this. The mortality rate due to increased substance abuse is having an impact on this. Can you help peel back some of the layers to help us dispel this myth that it's not just that people don't want to work, but we really do have a labor shortage issue?
Yeah, I think that the will of the people here, I don't think that changed dramatically over time, or their love of working. It's other factors. So I think the most important is the fact that so many baby boomers are retiring that it's just, if you don't have a lot of people in the working age, or if it's not growing, then that puts a limit on labor supply. But I think in addition to that, there are a lot of bad things happening to the young generation, especially young men without a BA. We see their labor force participation rate declining over the years. We see a very significant increase in mental health issues for the young generation. Like the share of people in the age of 18 to 29 who report weekly symptoms of depression doubled over a decade, doubled. And as you mentioned, overdose deaths, and for each person who dies from an overdose, there are probably many that didn't die but are in some addiction situation that prevents them from holding a job. So we also see more and more young people who stay with their parents, and if you don't have a family and you don't need to pay the bills, then you're less inclined to work. So I think all of those factors are lowering labor supply, and in addition to a lot of other problems as well.
We had a great question from one of our listeners, and thank you, Ed, for submitting it. And this fits into what you were just talking about, Gad. So I think you might have sort of answered it, and then the report that you have also. With 2 years of evidence showing negative student outcomes from COVID disruptions, what impact is this going to have on learning? This learning deficit going to have in the labor markets in the next 5 years?
Right, that's a great question, and it's a topic of research that we started taking. So yeah, we are seeing during COVID there was lower attendance. All this remote learning was useful to some degree, but it certainly was not perfect. We see fewer people completing high school. We see fewer people enrolling in college. So, and I think that's a big trend. Fewer people will get post-secondary skills and degrees, so I think overall, if you look at new labor market entrants now versus pre-pandemic, there has been a deterioration in the quality of workers. I think it would be crucial to stop that trend. So, we are seeing now in the labor market people who were during the pandemic were in 10th grade and 11th grade. They didn't have time to recover from the damage to their education. But I think it's crucial that, the people who are in 8th grade, 7th grade during the pandemic, that somehow during the high school they are able to catch up. In many cases, I think it will not be the case, and that is a tragedy that someone that got out of middle school and they never made a comeback, and they will. Unfortunately, there will be a few of those, but the more we can deal with that, I think it's better for their future.
The more you talk, Gad, and especially since this is this is my passion as well. This is like whack-a-mole. Is every time you bring one thing up, I think of like 3 other scenarios of what needs to be fixed or why that might not work, and all these changes. So we're I'm still going to go back to, for those who are watching can see right above my head, never normal, and that will continue, But we were again at almost at the end. We got a couple things to do to wrap up. We always want to ask you. We always ask one last question to our guest, and that is there something that we should have asked you that we didn't?
Well, I think, and also since we're at the end, I'll kind of become a little more positive, because I know I probably worsened the mental health problems in the country just for the people who listen to me. But one very good and potentially huge trend that is helping the US is the overall shift of the global economy towards tech. Because the US is especially good in tech. It's like when oil prices are rising, it's good for Texas. because they are producing oil. The same is when the world is becoming more tech focused. It's good for the US, good for Silicon Valley especially, but for the US in general, because we have a comparative advantage in that, and that already in recent years I think significantly supported the US economy and will continue to do so in the coming decade. So I think that's something. There's a lot of tendency to focus on the negative things. Bad news sell, but this is also a very important trend.
Which fits in very, very well with the report that you guys did, Burning Glass Institute, which you collaborated with Business Higher Education Forum and Wiley, How Skills Are Disrupting Work. So looking at that, I think that's a great lead into that, and you can get that at burningglassinstitute.org. How can people get in touch with you, Gad?
I'm happy if you share my email.
Okay, we'll put that in the notes. We can put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and if they see me on the street, they can say hi.
Yeah, absolutely. And I highly recommend they connect with you on LinkedIn. You're incredibly active. You're one of my big distractions every day. It's like, I think I'm going to stay focused, and then you post something and it takes me off in another direction. But we are literally just at I won't even say we're in the first chapter of this. We're probably on the first page of what's going to come. So we do want to have you back. But I know we want to get to know you a little bit better. So I know Jason has a few additional questions before we go off the air here.
Yeah, real quick, Gad, just a few questions to get to know you better and help our listeners get to know you a little bit better too. Sure. We've talked so much about skills or maybe even hidden talents today. I've got to start with this one. What is maybe a hidden skill or talent that most people maybe wouldn't guess about you?
Well, I've been told that I have good sense of humor in presentations, so I think I made a few jokes here, but I certainly that's something that people told me in the past. It's unusual. Yeah.
Awesome. How about a superpower? If you could choose any type of superpower or mutant ability of some kind, like on the X-Men, what would it be?
As I kind of get older and I kind of feel my memory is not what it used to be. So maybe a superpower that you never forget anything and you remember everything you saw in your an experience in your entire life. That's a unique. I don't know how useful it is, but I maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. I think my wife would vote for that one for me to have also, especially when she gives me a list of 2 things at the grocery to go pick up. And the moment I step foot inside, the only thing going through my head is like the Super Mario theme. I can't even remember the 2 things she told me. So I'm with you on that one. And then how about this one? How about a favorite song or a favorite band? What do you listen to that gets you in the flow when you're doing all of your economy research?
Well, probably my favorite band is a little boring, at least for people in my age, like and maybe more so even in Ira's age, the Beatles. But my second favorite band, which is less, is still very known, but a little less popular, Dire Straits. I am a big fan of Dire Straits.
Love that. Gad, we can't thank you so much for being with us today on the show and sharing so many insights and wisdom and positivity too on what we have in store for 2023. Again, Gad Levanon, Chief Economist with Burning Glass Institute. To learn more about their work and the reports and research that they're doing, go to burningglassinstitute.org. And then if you search for Gad Levanon on LinkedIn, I'm going to take a guess here, but I'm guessing you may be the only one or maybe just one of a handful of Gad Levanons on LinkedIn. That'd be another great way to connect with him.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a real pleasure as always.
And Gad, you made the reference to the Beatles, which is not my favorite band, by the way, but it just brought up a funny story of how this relates. When I had my practice, and that was probably in like 1990, 91. So we're going back 30 years. We were talking about the Beatles, and one of my one of the staff then. She was like 18 or 19 years old. She said, yeah, my parents talk about them. I remember them. And they couldn't name any of the Beatles. It was, it's like, well, did you ever hear Paul McCartney? And go, oh, yeah. Was he a member of the Beatles? So,
Yeah.
Great, crazy stuff that goes through our minds. But thank you very much, Gad. We definitely are going to have you back, hopefully more frequently than once a year, to keep us up and keep us smarter, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Wow, and Ira, we barely had time to scratch the surface on a lot of the comments and questions that came in today too. So a lot of interaction, a lot of interest in the things that Gad was sharing with us today.
Yeah, for sure. As I said, we not only, well, I said I was initially thinking we're just in the first chapter, but we might just be on the first page of what's going to involve. And we've got a great opportunity tomorrow as well, when we have Odeon Capital Conversations. Dick Beauvais, Matt Van Alstyne. Dick's been doing this for 50 some years. And we're going to have a real good opportunity to look at the Wall Street side, really the business side, rather than more on the labor and the jobs and the hiring side. But some of the takeaways. I mean, I think, just love listening to Gad. I think that was one of the comments too from one of our listeners. There was a comment in there. I'm not sure that Gad shared anything that I didn't know, other than just confirm that we're living in a never normal, and things are going to continually change. And for each solution, there's probably 3 different arguments or 3 different additional discussions. And again, in the beginning, you talked about, one of the solutions, and this is universal. I think every single person that we talk to and every person that we listen to says that we need a better, more effective immigration policy. And the chances of that happening in the next 2 years is pretty close to 0. So we have to look at some of these other solutions as, for skill development. We had a nice comment about workforce investment or workforce development boards. That's certainly, they've been around a long time, and I know a lot of people have pushed them off, and some could be more effective. Some have been very effective, but hopefully they're going to take a role. Disruptions in education, disruptions in way that people hire, disruptions in how we credential, so many topics.
Absolutely. For me, the big takeaway as he was talking today was thinking about either end of the talent pool when it comes to age. Let's stop giving the boomers reasons to head out the door faster. If you're a leader, thinking about everything you can do to be conducive to creating a flexible working environment where maybe you can keep them on part-time, if it's work that they get purpose and fulfillment and meaning from. But that, we want to have more and more of those people to have those types of skills and empathy and wisdom and creativity as part of the workforce, instead of, just saying completely cutting it off and retiring. But then on the other end too, when he was talking about, we need revitalization in schools too, of making sure that we are closing that gap for the kids who missed out on some learning in school because of COVID, but also making sure that we aren't just pushing everyone into college, that there's credentialing, a lot of other creative ways to get the skills that they need for jobs that are very well paying, that have tremendous meaning and fulfillment. But let's figure out ways to get those type of pathways in place earlier in schools, and to create those healthy collaborations between those organizations and schools to be preparing the next generation of folks that are going to be in the labor market. And so with all that, I'm Jason Cochran signing off. Until next time, we hope that you will like or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And also check out our new website, geeksgeezersgoogleization.com. Among the many exciting things we have going on, we launched a new website this year with a fresh look. And we'd also appreciate it if you join Googleization Nation, our growing community where there's going to be lots of resources and special opportunities that are exclusive for members there this year in 2023 as well. So until next time, I'm Jason Cochran.
And I'm Ira Wolfe. And special thanks to Y Institute for partnering with us and sponsoring this episode. Thanks, as Jason said, to being part of Googleization Nation. And when you do go up to the website within the next few days, we'll be launching our blog. So if you want to read about the podcast, if you want to check out what some of the highlights were without listening to the whole thing, you can certainly do that. We encourage you to listen to the full episodes or join us live every Wednesday at 1 o'clock. But other than that, you can basically go up and get a summary. Until next time, don't let the shift hit your plans.